Well, hello. It's been a bit of a time since we've done one of these programmes, and in a way, we're probably letting the dust settle on what was going on. We're talking about the tribunal, obviously, and the outcome of that, which has been incredible. But anyway, we've got Sam and we've got Chris here. You know both, retired MHK, and Jeff, the organ of sensibility, and I don't know how to describe it. You're a little bit naughty, but that's what we like about it, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I've come in camouflage today.
A acerbic but accurate commentator. I'll do.
Okay, let's go on to, we're talking about the tribunal here that came to its conclusion, Dr. Ranson. And first of all, let's talk about how it was shut down in Tynwald, because this great thing about the sub-judiciary.
Okay.
We've both got opinions on that. And
do you want to go first?
You start, okay.
Well, let's pick up one particular point where the President shut down Claire Christian MHK when she asked a question, as I recall, as follows. Did Catherine Magson pay tax and insurance on Ireland? And extraordinarily, the President shut her down. Now, if you read the Tribunal, it's very clear that not only did Catherine not pay Manx tax and insurance, she wasn't actually employed by the Isle of Man at all.
But that took a long time to find out, didn't it?
Yes, but it was known in the Tribunal.
Yeah, but they went round.
Hang on a second, let's stick with sub-judice.
Okay.
Now, the point is, the President, and here we're talking about the separation of powers. You've got the judiciary, the parliamentary process, and the executive. And I'd like to say at this stage how refreshing and comforting it is that our judicial process, as expressed by the Tribunal, has worked perfectly, with absolute integrity and separation, which is exactly as it should be. And if we want to look for something good out of all of this, then surely that's an important aspect.
Well, we haven't got that, we've got nothing.
But what we need is a better understanding where the fault lines lie in terms of the relationship between legal advice, the judiciary, executive, and the parliamentary process. So let's go back to the President's position. He shut Claire Christian down, in my opinion, quite wrongly. So where would the President have taken his advice? Bear with me on this. He must have taken his advice, presumably, from the Attorney General. Now, the Attorney General sits immediately, or the acting one, sits immediately to his left in Tynwald all the time. Now, it's important to note here that the Attorney General also sits on the Council of Ministers. So the Attorney General sits on the executive, and he sits effectively in the parliamentary process. He cannot give, he or she, whoever the Attorney General is, cannot give two independent opinions. And in legal terms, there are as many opinions as there are lawyers, effectively. And what the parliamentary process has always lacked, and I've raised this on innumerable occasions, is separate advice to the parliamentary process, independent from the advice that the executive get. Now, it must have been the Attorney General who shut the whole thing down under the auspices of sub-judice. I don't think that was right. Now, I'm not a legally trained person, as you know, but the point is that for a couple of reasons. First of all, yes, there is a further hearing that Douglas Stewart, the chair of the tribunal, has said must now take place regarding the concoction of documents and the omission of documents, which he's expressed deep concern about and wishes to address it. It's perfectly valid to say, yes, that should be not discussed until the tribunal has issued its judgment, and I absolutely respect that. However, the judgment is out and clear and concise on Catherine's treatment, and it absolutely is beyond belief that the government would be, and let's use a strong word, is stupid enough to even consider an appeal against that judgment when it is so packed full of information and commentary, which is incredibly well supported. There may be some tiny point of law in there that might be capable of subject to some vague or unusual appeal. But that, in terms of the public expression of a public opinion, would be held, frankly, in disdain, because it would give the impression that government, in trying to appeal a clear judgment, was actually trying to shut the whole process down using the sub-judiciary rule. So if it is and for a long time, because an appeal could take some significant time. So if it's clearly improper not to have an appeal on the judgment thus far delivered, then it should be perfectly, and executive should say, no, we're not going to appeal. Because in a few weeks' time, they will either have to have appealed or not. So it opens
44
up.
days and so a lot less than that
and
now.
It's running a lot less than that
Yeah.
now. So why not come out now and say, look, there will not be an appeal. We respect this judgment. And therefore, it opens it up to much more parliamentary process. But what the president did, presumably not really understanding, A, his role properly, or Parliament failing to be robust because it hadn't got the appropriate independent advice that it needs separate to the AG, that we end up with a situation where, frankly, Tynwald, as a parliamentary process, looked weak when it came to the Chief Minister's statement.
Okay, from a quick word with the President afterwards, he said to me that obviously Alf did do some responses, but under the limited areas that he thought he could go to. But Sam, I mean, we felt it was being shut down, and we were scratching our heads about this sub-judiciary thing, because once something's in the public domain, and like we were only dealing with that stuff, I mean, we know there's other stuff that's still to deal with. Were you surprised, taken back, and your reaction to what was going on?
Well, the whispers that it was going to happen had started to sort of form going into Tuesday morning. And then when it did happen, it was kind of, it was weird. People have heard it or they've seen clips of it. It was weird being in the chamber watching it, because you got a lot better idea of, there were times where the Chief Minister was asked questions. I think we've got actually one of them on camera where he looks up at the President and to go, I can't answer that, can I? And I go, it was a really weird thing, because you surely must have the thing of, either the President is being led there by the Chief Minister, which people who have watched that video, that is the comment they've made. And that doesn't look good either way. But the whole thing is that it just sort of, it comes across yet again that something stinks. And it's a problem the government have got with various different aspects. But it also, like you say, made Tynwald look like, so what? And admittedly, this isn't, I don't think this is the strongest Tynwald anyway. I think it's had problems getting together. But this has just sort of furthered that, where you look at, because if you look at where we are now, effectively the executive has come out of this quite strong. You know, there's been a fair number of people dispatched across government.
Yeah, we'll come to that a bit later on.
But you've now got the situation where the Chief Minister's looking very strong. A lot of people have gone, and Tynwald, off the back of that, looks incredibly weak.
Can I just come in on that one, Sam? Because I'm not sure that's right, that because the Chief Minister looks to the President as to whether he should or shouldn't answer it, I think he must have been aware. He must have been in advance, therefore, aware of the advice the AG was giving to the President, and was seeking from the President as to, having already understood what he thinks the position to be, from what you've said, that he felt he couldn't answer it. So it wasn't. I don't think it was an executive decision coming from the Chief Minister.
It gives this appearance that something stinks, and it feeds into this where the imagery from government throughout this whole thing has been awful, and it's got worse because we've yet to hear one word out of them, which everyone's been expecting. We're sorry. Nobody's apologised for anything yet.
Okay. That is incredible. But again,
we'll need to come to that in more detail.
So many things.
There's so many things.
Yeah.
But let's just go back to this issue about the inadequate relationship within government, between parliamentary process and the legal advice available to them. All they have is the AG. Now, this has been a long-standing problem. It has just emerged because Rosalind Ranson had the courage to really push through, and effectively, because of her case, exposed so much that was wrong. And I just take you back a whole number of years when these sort of problems innate within the system were self-evident to me, and that was why I pushed so hard to get the Constitutional, Legal and Justice Committee set up, and then a Minister of Justice. Why?
Oh, and they were talking about this a lot, weren't they, about this sole entity, which you've been going on about?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's all tied into this. And the reason part of the reason I was so anxious that this should happen was that it was again self-evident to me that because everybody fundamentally understood that there have to be separations between the executive, the parliamentary process and the judiciary, they understood there should be, but they didn't understand what those were. They weren't informed or confident. And so as soon as something like sub-judice appears on the floor of the Parliament, Tynwald, or the Keys, everything shuts down because nobody knows what to do. Now, I have tried, and as often I say, failed to try to resolve this, because a number of years ago, I pointed this out with one or two other members at the time, and said, Parliament needs its independent advice. Therefore, we need a Solicitor General. That was listened to. Yes, you're going to get a Solicitor General. And then before you could say boo, the Solicitor General came in. Was he separate and independent? No. He ended up being the Deputy Attorney General. And so that opportunity for independent advice never came, which effectively has the effect, and I'm sorry to say this, of making the Attorney General's operation, which is too big and too well spread, to be complacent. I mean, fortunately, we're seeing now, as this is progressively coming under inspection, i.e. the role function of the Attorney General's office, that we're now seeing at last the Director of Prosecutions being removed further and further from the Attorney General's office. But parliamentary process, members of Tynwald must have the confidence to stand their ground and to get the right advice. It's arguable as to whether the Attorney General should even sit in Tynwald. Why? Just think about this. When I was a minister, I often had the AG sitting to my left, as it happened, just the way the room was laid out. His duty was to advise to the best of his ability the executive with regard to any matter. When that matter then comes to Tynwald as a policy or a legislation or to Keys or a judgment on something, the only legal advice available in Tynwald was the Attorney General. So effectively, members who were trying to challenge it could only hear exactly the same advice that the executive have already received, which is next to useless. So, like so much that's happening and is being exposed at the moment, this didn't happen because of this particular house, this administration. This has been building up and brewing for a long time, and at last we had in Rosalind Ranson somebody who would challenge and knock on the door of these problems and say, no, this shouldn't be.
Right. So in Tynwald that day, should it have been more question of say your questions, but we may have to stop you if you cross the boundaries, rather than throwing down that sub-judice thing at the right beginning? Because it was only Claire Christian that really was put back in a box almost by the president, because you can't ask that, you can't ask that. Everyone else obeyed the rules almost.
The advice the AGs gave to the president, was lazy, and the president was lazy himself in not fundamentally questioning the president's role. And I'd like to talk today about roles, and I don't think people quite get often what their roles are. The president's primary role is the integrity and process within Tynwald. And did he fundamentally challenge and question the Attorney General, or did, like so often happens, the Attorney General said it, therefore that's it? Okay.
Sam, I think the acting Attorney General, was in conversation also with the President, because they sit next to each other, probably advising quietly when they heard questions. What would you like to see happen?
Well, I would have wanted to see a full debate on it, to be honest. I think that the areas that it does come back to something you saying, unless they're going to appeal, unless they're actually stupid enough to appeal this, at which point it ends up in front of the Deemsters, and probably Deemster call it, who wouldn't, would do what he does with it, but it's going over this again, and then you're getting these things gone through, and nobody really needs that, and especially not the government. They really don't need that. But I think from what we had of it was, your thing is right, that the backbenchers need their own advice.
Of course they do.
But equally, I'm just kind of sort of, unless someone's done it behind the scenes, right? There's no way in the world that they all turned up on the Tuesday morning, and Lawrence Skelly's gone, oh, by the way, I'm just going to make a quick announcement before we start, and this is the first they've heard of it. Because we'd heard that it was going to happen. So if we've heard it, they've heard it. So surely there should have been a point where they should have gone as members, we want to see this advice, we want to know what you're advising.
So you're saying it's orchestrated, or they were complicit, or they just turned over and let that happen?
Effectively does seem to be what happened, though, is that they did, we don't know who's asked what, even in terms of behind the scenes of this, but surely somebody must have gone and said to Lawrence Skelly, what advice, we want to see the advice you've been given. Because otherwise, all we've got at the minute is, like you're saying, he turned to the Solicitor General, said, what do you think about this? Sub-judice, don't bother.
Well, we've got the dates for an appeal, which will be passing soon, but there is other action that now appears to be ongoing, which will limit certain things.
It's perfectly possible to close, from my understanding, close the matter related to the judgment of Rosalind Ranson's employment and move on to the whole matter of concoction of data and suppression of data, which I think in a previous interview I've said to you is really a very, very serious matter and not something that Douglas Stewart, the chairman of the tribunal, would have entered into lightly. But we can separate the two off quite easily and quite clearly. And it's important that the full debate happens as soon as possible,
right.
because
there can be a debate. Yeah, I mean, this is not the end of it, is it?
The only thing I did ponder with at the time was something else which happened recently, which was the sentencing at the Notfield trial, where Tynwald and the AG's chambers and the Chief Constable were very harshly spoken of by the trial judge, the Deemster Richmond, where he criticised the process they'd gone through, which nearly, he said the thing, it was by luck, not by design, that he was able to let the trial go ahead after what Tynwald had done. So this is sort of one of these where there's a part of me thinks that could have fed into this, that they were that concerned about getting something wrong by accident because they haven't had good enough advice, that they've gone, let's just not do anything. Let's just don't talk about it, and we'll talk about something else for now. We'll come back to that when it's not a problem. But then if this thing with this next hearing that goes ahead, if what is being said is true, that is going to go beyond Douglas Stewart's remit. At which point, this isn't just a case of problem. Now, of course, a lot of the key characters have left, but that won't be something that Tynwald's going to be able to talk about either. Which my concern is they'll find a way to attach that to this, and at which point it'll be a long time before we get a thorough Tynwald debate on what's going on here.
And coming back more purely to the sub, before we move on, this issue of sub-judice, you also recall that I previously said to you how jaundiced and disgusted I was when sub-judice was used over the shutdown of the issues around Abbotswood, which should never, ever have happened, and it was not sub-judice. And yet, that was the last house.
We were always locked down on that.
And yet Tynwald tamely accepted it. This has got to stop. It's very clear that we've got to be incredibly careful to separate parliamentary and executive process off from the rights and privileges of the judicial process. But equally, if we're not careful, Tynwald is going to become a lame duck in all of this as a parliamentary process.
Wow.
Yes, and members come in, and I use this term not in a sort of derogatory way, but they come in naively often in the first instance. Why would they know better than they do? And if you don't know something, you shy away. I mustn't repeat myself. I've sort of said this already. So it's important that they have that clear, separate advice. And that advice to them has got to be completely separate and distinct from the Attorney General.
Just to wrap this up, how should it have been done? Just get this, how that particular sitting of Tynwald, how should it have been constructed? Any views?
I think if they were that concerned about... Sorry, 1 second.
Oh, dear.
It was swallowed water wrongly.
Water?
Water went down
not your inhaler?
Something wrong with your water.
It's all right. When you're ready. Do you want to shoot? I
thought it was the state media that's meant to kill you. No, I think if they were that concerned about sub-judice, they should have just gone, the Chief Minister's going to make a statement, and at the next sitting we'll debate it then, because in effect that's what you sort of got. June Watson at the end got a confirmation. We will come back to it, but for me, if they were that concerned, why go ahead with what went ahead? Because it was a shambles and it looked bad from everybody's point of view.
Right, that's that part. You hold it. We'll have more in a moment, and we'll go through the characters involved. See you shortly.
Oh, sorry.